Hi there. In this video, we will explore a module called Mouse Meta Class, which is a meta object protocol for mouse classes. To put it simply, this module allows you to do some very neat things with your mouse classes, like install methods and attributes at the runtime. We already know that we can add methods and attributes to our classes defined in PM files. However, there might be rare cases where you want to modify your class at the runtime after your modules have been compiled. Mouse Meta Class gives you all the tools to do so if you ever want to modify your classes after compilation. Let's see an example of how we can access instance of a meta class and explore some of the methods available on the meta class object. So what I have in front of me is the simple test script we have been using before. We're using the human class that we defined in the previous lectures, and it's quite simple. It only has a single attribute called name, and it accepts a string value. And in our test script, we're just initializing a new instance of the human class. Now, what if we wanted to, for example, add a method called test, which returns a simple value, let's say a string, and concatenates the name attribute. So for example, I would like to say warn human and call it method test. And if I save that, you can try to run the script now, but obviously this is going to complain that the test method doesn't exist. Now, how we can add this test method after we have initialized an instance of the human class? Well, meta class is here to help us to do that. You can actually access the meta class in a couple of ways. One of the simplest ways is to say let's call it meta equals human. So that's our human instance, and we can access the meta attribute on it. And if we simply do something like warn ref, so what type of a reference this is, and save that and run the script, we're going to see that we printed out mouse meta class. Now this meta class exposes a couple of methods. As from the previous example, we want to add the test method after creating an instance of human. So what we can do, we can call meta add underscore method, and it accepts two arguments. The first argument is what is the name of the method you want to add. So in our case, this is going to be a test method. And the second argument is going to be a subroutine where we can define the logic of this method. So I'm going to say sub and define the subroutine. So I'm going to say myself equals shift, so shifting the first argument from the arguments list. And then we can simply return, let's say self, name, and concatenate that with hello, an exclamation mark. So when you add methods through the meta class, you're still getting the same current self context. This is the same as it would happen if we would define that method inside the human class. Now, one thing we want to do is, however, we want to add a name for our human instance because we are returning self name concatenated with hello. So we're going to say name equals Joe. Now, if I save this and run the script, oops, looks like I am missing a semicolon, so let's add that and rerun the script. We're going to see Joe, which is our name, and then concatenated with space and hello. All right, cool. So we can add methods to this meta class. Now, what if you want to add an attribute? Well, it's actually quite similar. You can say meta add attribute, and let's add a new attribute called language. And the second argument is the same keywords you can use when you're defining an attribute inside a class. So you can say is read only or read write, is a default values, so on and so on. So here I'm just going to say that this is read only, and this is also going to be a string. Well, it accepts a string value. And if we save that, and let's add that semicolon that we missed before. And on the second line, after the calling this method, we can do human and just simply warn out the language. So just print out the language attribute that we installed. So for now, this is going to throw a warning because we're not setting the language attribute. So if I try to print this, we're just going to see warning, something's wrong. After adding that attribute definition, we can say human there. The language is going to be Spanish. So if I save that, rerun the script. Oops, so we define this as a read-only attribute. So we actually want to do read-write. And let's rerun the script. We're going to see that now we're printing out Spanish. The key point here is we're not adding methods and attributes to just the instance. We're actually adding those methods and attributes to the human class. Meaning, if I would create a new instance of human, and let's call that human2. Oops, so that's just human2, and name this to James. Save that, and we actually want to also print out the second human attribute. And let's do that with language as well. So human1, human2, language, test, and we also want to set the language for human2, and let's say French. Save that, rerun the script. Like we're getting warning because yes, we're setting the language to human1 instance instead of human2. So let's save that, rerun it. And now we're going to see that these lines are printed out for human1 instance. Well, human1, where we print out hello from Joe, then the line 2, which is hello from James, and the last two attributes from human1 instance holds value of Spanish, as we define here, and the last warning that we're printing out is the language for human2. So you can already probably see how very powerful this is. You can add methods, attributes, and do other useful logic on the fly. So let's explore other available functionalities on the meta class. So I'm just going to remove these warnings that we added before because we know those are working. And what we can do, we can warn meta and use this has method. So has method basically checks if a method exists on that class, and it returns a truthy value if it does and falsy value if it doesn't. So in this case, we can check if we have a method speed, which we know we don't. We didn't add a speed method. We only added the test method. And in our human class, we don't have it. And here in the test script, I'm going to use a ternary expression to say, if this is truthy, then I'm going to print out yes. Otherwise, I'm going to print out no. So if we save that, rerun the script, we're going to see no, because we don't have a speed method available on the human class. However, if I check for a method such as test, which we just have added, we're going to get yes, because that method exists. So does, for example, if we add a method here, let's say sub, check, and no functionality needed, and I'm just going to do the check method, save this, rerun the script, we're going to see, yes, the check method does exist in our human class, because we just how added it. Alright, so what else we can use? Well, we can use something like getting a method list. I can say warn meta, and from there we can call a method called get method list. And if I'm going to save that, and I'm going to remove the previous warning, and this is going to give us array ref of all the method names. So to print this out properly, what we can do, we can add a dumper method in front of it. So it just kind of nicely formats the data we're trying to debug. Now if I rerun the script, we're going to see that we have a couple of methods, right? So we have the dumper method. And the reason why we have the dumper method is because the dumper method is automatically imported when you're using a module, and it's not being cleaned up, so it installs that method on your class. So that's why it's also available on our human instance, and it comes actually from this module. The next ones are the name, which was added by mouse module, and we can use to set the attribute. And then we also have the meta method, and we know that because we just called it to get the meta class. And the last three are test that we installed, check that we added previously, just to make sure that we're still picking up the methods defined in the class. And the last one is the language, which was added by the mouse module to set the language attribute. Now the final method that we're going to look at is called get attribute. So if I do get attribute, so attribute, and let's say we can get the name attribute from our human class, and we provide that as a string. What we're going to get back is not the name, or aka a string, we're actually going to get back a mouse meta attribute instance. And if you look up the documentation, you're basically going to see that these attributes on our instances are defined as instance of the mouse meta attribute. So you can do even further functionality to these attributes. You can change the type definition, what kind of values it accepts, default method, and so on and so on. But we're not going to go into too much detail on that. So that's it about the methods available on the meta class that we're going to explore. However, I did mention that there are a couple of ways how you can access the meta class. Now, how we originally accessed the meta class was by getting it from the human instance. However, you can also get the meta class from the human class. I'm just removing the $sign before the meta class, but I'm not going to change anything here. And if I rerun the script, it's going to work just fine. We're still getting the name attribute from our meta class, and it's not complaining that meta is not initialized and so on. Another alternative, what we can use is a mouse capital meta class, and from there we can say mouse meta class initialize, and then the name of our class, which is going to be human in this case. If I save that, let's maybe change this to something more simpler, like meta get method list. Save that, rerun the script. We're going to see that we're still getting all the method names. Now, using the class name or getting the meta class through this initialize method might be your preferred way. The reason being, if we move this above the initialization of the instances from the human class, what we could do, we could add the language attribute before we are initializing the instances. Meaning, when we add that attribute before creating those instances, we already have the language attribute available on the human class. So I could say here that now language is going to be Spanish. And if I'm gonna set the second language for the human 2 to French, save that, and let's just print out two things. So that's going to be an array ref of human and language 1 and human 2 and language. Save that. We run the script. We're going to see that now we did get a language attribute installed before we created instances of a human class. So meaning we could set the language when we are initializing instances of human class. And this actually might be your preferred way. That's it for this video. We explored mouse meta class and how we can use it to modify our classes at a runtime. Word of warning, however, this functionality can be extremely powerful to build dynamic and flexible code. But when there's really a need to do so, of course, this kind of power comes with a cost. Using meta classes will slow down your code. This is because your application needs to keep track of instances of all the objects and change them on the fly. In the next video, we will explore how we can disable meta class functionality if we know beforehand that it won't be needed. And most of the time, I'm pretty sure it won't be needed. Because really, when you're creating your classes, you kind of already know what methods and attributes you're going to need. So using the meta class is really just for specific scenarios. Alright, for now, I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.